right, everybody. It's time for Baxter County Roundtable again, episode number 36. We welcome everybody. We have two special guests tonight. One is Nick Brani. I'm going to let Russ introduce him here in a minute. We've also got Brian Norris. So these should be some pretty interesting fellows. Russ Gillis is we're co-hosts, so I'll let Russ take over for now. Go for it.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Baxter County Roundtable. We're sponsored in part by Mountain Home Heating and Air. Voted best in the Twin Lakes area for 2 years in a row, both in 2024 and 2025. They're the largest Goodman dealer in the Twin Lakes area. Mountain Home Heat and Air, together with Goodman, are two names you can trust. Goodman systems are made in America by Americans just outside of Houston, Texas. Mountain Home Heat and Air also specializes in Daikin mini split systems. From new installations to duct cleaning and everything in between, Mountain Home Heat and Air are the people you call for all your HVAC needs. They offer high quality systems and workmanship, affordable prices, and they do have financing available. So give Kurt Lawrence and the folks at Mountain Home Heat and Air a call at 870-425-HVAC. That's 870-425-4822. And now,
something made in America.
Yes, sir.
Sounds good to me.
And so now we'd like to turn it over. Supreme Court Justice Nick Brani is currently on the Supreme Court, and he's a busy man. He has another engagement at 7 o'clock, so I'm just going to turn it over to him and let him put out his message to the people here in north central Arkansas. Justice Brani, thank you for being on our Baxter County Roundtable podcast.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And my apologies to everybody that I'm coming to you from a car currently parked in Grant County, but last few days of an election, so lots of traveling going on. But as Russ said, my name is Nick Brani. I am the newest member of the Arkansas Supreme Court. I was appointed to that position by Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and I'm currently running for a full term on that court. I always tell people if there's just one thing you remember about me other than my name and my election date, which is March 3rd, it should be this. I probably sued Joe Biden more than anybody else in the state of Arkansas. So before I was appointed to the bench, I was the Solicitor General of Arkansas. And the Solicitor General was basically your top courtroom lawyer, the person that the Attorney General trusts to handle the most important, the most critical, and the most controversial cases. And part of that, my job was to sue Joe Biden when he broke the law, which he did a lot, so I sued him a lot. Aside from that, who am I? Well, I'm a conservative and an originalist. That means that I read the Constitution as our framers would have originally understood that document. I don't believe it's the role of a judge to update the language of the Constitution to reflect modern social policy or my personal values or anything like that. Instead, I read the Constitution in its language as the framers would have understood that language, which is a big difference between me and my opponent, who believes in a living Constitution that he sees it as his job to update in order to reflect modern social policy. So I also believe that it's the role of a judge to call balls and strikes, and that the Constitution is an extraordinary document for an equally extraordinary country. It protects the right of every single one of us out there, whether you're a conservative, a libertarian, a liberal, or frankly, even an Alabama football fan. The Constitution protects your right to free speech just the same. By way of my background, I grew up in South Arkansas, in a town called Camden, which is about 100 miles due south of Little Rock, so the opposite side of the state, about as far as you can get actually from Mountain Home in Baxter County, almost in Louisiana. I live in Little Rock today with my wife, Sarah. We've been married for about 13 years. We have two little kids. My daughter, Margaret, is 9. She is named after Margaret Thatcher, the great British Prime Minister. And as I always tell people, she has the personality to match, which is wonderful For a little girl, like that's the type of iron determination you want, but she still has that personality when, like this evening, she wanted pizza for dinner and we didn't have that. My son Frederick is 6. He's in the process of learning to read. And one of the things that we've had to do on the campaign trail is we've actually done a lot of this FaceTime reading to each other. We've taken to buying 2 copies of the same book so that we can read together at night because I've been away from home a lot. So I grew up in Camden, like I said. I graduated from Camden Fairview High School. And then after that, I went to college in DC at George Washington University. Graduated in 2.5 years, mostly because I couldn't afford to borrow any more money. And then law school at the University of Michigan Law School. And I worked my way through both college and law school. And as I said, I borrowed money, quite a bit of it. And then I paid back every single penny that I borrowed. In other words, I didn't ask the people watching to bail out my student loans, and I didn't ask Joe Biden to force them to bail out my student loans. In fact, just the opposite. I co-led the legal team that persuaded the United States Supreme Court to block President Biden's illegal attempt to cancel student debt. So I'm part of the team that blocked that illegal attempt. So after law school, I started my career at a large firm in DC, the same one that had represented President George W. Bush during the 2000 election litigation. Did that for about 5-6 years. Kind of got tired of carrying other people's briefcase because as the junior associate, you don't get to do the really fun stuff. And I went to work for the Securities and Exchange Commission in Washington, helping to protect small-time investors and pension funds from people who would basically swindle their money away. I did that for about 6 years, and then in 2016, Leslie Rutledge, who was then the Attorney General, invited me to come back home to Arkansas to become the state's first ever deputy solicitor general. She had just hired the first solicitor general. And then when my predecessor left, I became Leslie's solicitor general. And then when Tim Griffin came into office, he asked me to remain as his solicitor general. So I mentioned the student loan case as one case example that I worked on. Another example, I'm the lawyer who went to court to defend girls' sports. When President Biden issued an executive order putting biological men on girls' sports teams, I'm the lawyer who went to court and got an injunction blocking that. So I stopped the attempt to put boys on girls' sports teams in Arkansas, partially to preserve the right of girls like my own daughter, who's much more athletic than I ever was, to ensure that she gets an equal opportunity to play sports. So that case meant a lot to me. Also, as Solicitor General, I helped block the WOTUS regulation, which is a federal regulation you probably heard of, that would have made a puddle in your front yard a water of the United States subject to federal government regulation.
Hallelujah.
I sued as part of the legal team multiple times to block various iterations of that regulation. Also, as Solicitor General, I stood with Israel. I successfully defended Arkansas's law that bars state contractors from engaging in anti-Semitic boycotts, defeating the Arkansas Times in that case. So as you can imagine, the Arkansas Times is not a fan of mine. Also, as Solicitor General, it's my honor to argue 2 cases personally in the United States Supreme Court on behalf of the people of Arkansas, and I won both of them. So in the first, I'm the lawyer who defeated the pharmacy benefit managers. So you've probably heard of these entities. They're basically entities that drive up the cost of prescription drugs for seniors and drive out of business small town, rural, and community pharmacies. Arkansas passed bipartisan legislation that cracked down on their tactics that drive small pharmacies out of business, and the PBM industry sued. They'd never lost a case. They'd always managed to block every single law that regulated their industry. I went to the U.S. Supreme Court after the state lost at the trial court level. I persuaded the U.S. Supreme Court to take the case, and then I successfully defended our legislation, winning that case 8-0 at the U.S. Supreme Court. The second case I argued in the U.S. Supreme Court, I led a bipartisan coalition of more than 32 states in suing the state of Delaware over unclaimed property. In fact, our coalition was so bipartisan that my second and third chairs in that case were Texas and California, 2 states that you never see on the same side of anything, let alone a legal issue in the Supreme Court. But they both trusted me to handle the case. I argued that case in the U.S. Supreme Court and ultimately won that case 9-0 at the court, securing about $250 million for Arkansas and our sister states taxpayers in the process. Also, as SG, it was my honor to file numerous briefs in the U.S. Supreme Court defending the Second Amendment, defending voter ID, defending election integrity, demanding justice for crime victims, and standing with cake artists and florists when the government demanded that they participate in ceremonies contrary to their conscience. Now, I brought all that experience with me to the court when the governor appointed me. Again, I believe it's the role of a judge to say what the law is, not what you want it to be. I also believe, as Justice Clarence Thomas, who's my legal role model, once explained, I think, better than most, there are really only two ways to interpret the Constitution. We can try as best we can to discern what the framers intended, or we can simply make it up. I don't believe in making it up. So, as a justice of the Arkansas Supreme Court, I don't make it up. Instead, as I said, I read the Constitution as the framers would have understood that document. That's fair for everybody because we know what the rules are in advance. If you want to change the Constitution, we have a process for doing that. It's called the amendment process. It's been used multiple times in our history. So if you want to change the Constitution, that's the way you do it. It's not by judicial fiat. By contrast, my opponent is a far left liberal activist who ran for Congress unsuccessfully as a far left Democrat in Little Rock in the 2nd Congressional District, and then ran for the state legislature as a far left liberal Democrat. And he's supported and has accepted donations from anti-gun activists and basically everybody on the left. His view of the Constitution is very different from mine. He views it as an opportunity to update the Constitution to determine what people's rights should be. That's not my view of the Constitution. Also, since joining the court, I've been a zealous advocate for openness and transparency. I've pushed hard for more public oral arguments because I think everybody out there should be able to see our court in action, see how individual justices approach issues, and then ultimately hold us accountable at the ballot box if you think we strayed from the judicial role. And then the other thing I brought to the court when I joined it is a real mission to simplify and clarify the law in Arkansas. So one of the things that I saw as Solicitor General is we've got a lot of confusing law in Arkansas, a lot of case law that frankly isn't in English and doesn't make sense. Exceptions to exceptions that make it hard to run a small business, make it hard for people to know what their rights are. So when I joined the Arkansas Supreme Court, I came with a mission to write my opinions in plain, ordinary English, not legal gibberish. And, we post our opinions on the Supreme Court's website. I invite people to read them and see the progress. And you'll see that I write in plain, ordinary English, not legal gibberish. I think every person out there, you ought to know what your rights are without needing to hire a lawyer. That makes it better for everybody out there. The other thing that I'll add is I'm sure everybody's aware, these judicial elections in Arkansas, they haven't gone great for conservatives. We've lost a lot of these races. And in fact, when I came back home to Arkansas in 2016, we had one of the most liberal Supreme Courts in the country because we'd lost so many of these elections. And we now finally have a conservative majority on the Supreme Court. And, it's a golden opportunity to correct some of that outlandish case law that developed with a very liberal court.
How many justices are there?
There are 7.
Okay.
And they're all statewide elections. There are 2 of us up this election cycle, but my colleague Cody Highland did not draw an opponent. So I'm the only one who's actually up for election this time around.
Okay.
I probably should give a little bit of background if it's helpful for folks on what the Arkansas Supreme Court does versus the U.S. Supreme Court and kind of how we work. So the best way to think of the Arkansas Supreme Court, trial courts in Arkansas, a trial judge who makes an initial decision or a ruling, to use a football analogy, they're basically like the officials on the field. It's their job to make the calls and they get a lot of discretion to do that. The Arkansas Supreme Court is kind of like the SEC office doing the replay officials. It's our job to review the call on the field, allowing for discretion to decide whether or not that's right or wrong. And that's really our role in the system. And then we are, for state law issues, the Arkansas Supreme Court is the final stopping point. So on issues of how you interpret the state constitution, we are the last word on that. You can't appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court on that. We also make decisions about what the federal constitution says that are binding on all state courts in Arkansas. So if we say the federal constitution should be interpreted some way, the lower courts have to apply it that way. That can, however, be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court because it's an issue of federal law.
Great.
Awesome.
So you've spent a lot of time reading the Federalist Papers then to see how what our founding fathers, how they communicated back and forth between each other, when they were writing the Constitution.
Yes, the Federalist Papers are good, and even the Anti-Federalist
Yes.
Papers actually are a good source for understanding what language meant at the time. So much of what lawyers are supposed to do is understand what you can't understand what something means without looking at what it meant at the time, because language just it changes over time. If you're interpreting a word the way we interpret modern language, you are effectively changing the document. And really, a good example of this is, part of the legal foundation in this country is Magna Carta. And Magna Carta uses, for instance, the term deer. Well, at the time Magna Carta was written, the term deer meant literally every animal, not the deer that we think of today that we all go out and hunt. So if we're not looking at the language as it meant at the time, we're effectively changing it by reading it differently.
Yeah, if you just look at I'm I'm 75 years old. A whole lot of the terms that we use today, we used when I was a young child, but they mean totally different things now than they did then. So I can
You can
understand.
remember that?
Well, some of them.
Oh my gosh, that's pretty good, Russ.
But and when you go back and read, it's just like reading the Bible. The King James version, and and then you read some of like the New Standard Version or whatever. The language that they used back then was completely different, considerably different, not completely, but considerably different than they use now. And like you said, when you try to change it and use the same words in today's vernacular, you have considerably changed that document.
Yeah, and the Bible is an excellent example of that, because when they update translations of the Bible, people go back and look at various translations and context and syntax in order to figure out what it means. That is an excellent example of sort of the same principles that apply to the Constitution in terms of interpretation.
Now, as far as current activity that's happening in government, are you able to discuss things like the paper ballots stuff that's going on?
So I'm not, unfortunately, our judicial ethics rules prohibit me from discussing either pending cases or potentially pending cases. So that's a good example of a case that I'm guessing nobody on who's listening would want me recused from. If I were to discuss the case, it would require my recusal.
Okay, that's
And we certainly don't want you to have to recuse yourself from anything, since you're one of our conservative side. Okay. Well, what else you got for us there? How's your campaign going?
So I grew up in Arkansas, so I should know it's a big state in terms of geography, but I don't know that I fully appreciated just how big it is until, for instance, I'd been in Bentonville and Texarkana in the same week. That's a little
so.
rough.
This is your first campaign.
Yes, I've never run for office before. I used to say I would never run for office. So, but I'm committed to doing this. I've enjoyed meeting people across Arkansas, hearing about communities across our state, and I've learned a lot even for talking to people about their experiences with the legal system. One thing that I now fully appreciate is we have a lot of counties across Arkansas where, you can view this as a good thing, but a lot of counties with relatively few lawyers. And what that means is if you have a legal problem in some of our smaller, more rural counties, there may be one lawyer or two who has to handle all the work. And that means if you've got a will to write, or you've got, let's say you want to settle a property dispute, even if you want to do it amicably, it may be very difficult for you to find a lawyer. And that's a problem. And part of why I talk about simplifying and clarifying the law is to make it easier on those lawyers in some of those communities. Because if we don't have complex standards that frankly are difficult for lawyers to understand, it'll make it a lot easier for those lawyers who do, or sort of jack of all trade lawyers, who I'm always impressed by because they do a lot of different things. It'll make it a lot easier for them to knock things out and work and serve their communities a lot faster. Also, will make it a lot easier for the circuit court and trial judges across Arkansas to make decisions quickly, because I know there's some backlogs in some of our circuit courts around the state. Part of that is our fault, because we've got confusing case law that doesn't make any sense, that's difficult for the trial judges to understand.
And me too.
Yeah, I've gotten to know a few of the candidates for the various judge positions up here in north central Arkansas. I kind of work with I kind of work a little bit with Fulton County, and so I go over there, and I've met all of the candidates for judge running over there, and then of course, part of the I guess the circuit or whatever over here in Baxter County is a little bit different. So, and we've had some of the judge candidates on actually. Bennett was that his name? One of the other candidates, very last year. So I hear what you say, and most of us, and I include myself on that, we don't know the difference between a district judge, a circuit judge, or whatever. It's like they're just all judges.
Well, and it gets even more complex because we have the Court of Appeals. So, most cases in Arkansas go to the Court of Appeals, at least initially, rather than us. The way it's set up is most civil cases, unless they involve a state constitutional issue, will go to the Court of Appeals first. And if you're dissatisfied with the decision in the Court of Appeals, you can ask us to take your case. It's part of what we call a petition for review, where you have to explain why you think we should take the case. I vote to grant and consider many more of those cases than
Uh-oh.
Well, I think we just lost him. Well,
I can still hear you guys. Can you still
oh,
hear
there
me?
you are.
You're back.
I never actually lost it. It just went blank. I could still hear
Oh.
you.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know where I cut out, but as I was explaining that most cases, at least in Arkansas, civil cases that aren't constitutional cases go initially to the Court of Appeals. And if you lose there, you can ask us to take your case. And I vote to hear more of those cases than probably anybody else in the court. But for criminal cases, the cases that come directly to us bypassing the Court of Appeals are cases involving the death penalty or life in prison or that involve state constitutional issues. Most criminal cases also initially go to the Court of Appeals. So we do have we have an intermediate
What's
court.
a typical number of cases you might be asked to hear?
So it's roughly 5 every 2 weeks.
And you take
So
how many?
Well, so if you're sorry, let me correct it. It's 5 that we're actually hearing. Those are cases that we are
Okay.
actually assigned, we've already taken, et cetera. The petitions, they vary wildly in terms of number. We can get a request for like 20 or 30 a month, and we only take a handful of them. Again, I vote to take many more of those cases because I think it's our job to clarify the law, and part of that is clarifying Court of Appeals decisions.
Yeah, makes sense.
Well, good, good. Well, all I can say is, I know I want to get you out of here quickly enough that you don't have to rush and you have time to recollect your thoughts before you get into your next engagement there. Justice Bronny, I just want to congratulate you. I think you've done a marvelous job so far. I heard your speech Saturday at the district Republican committee meeting in Cabot. Thought you did a great job down there. Everyone that I talked to also felt the same way. We're highly encouraged that we've got such a quality member on the Supreme Court here in Arkansas. And we certainly want to make sure that we get you back on that bench.
And did you have anything you wanted to add in closing?
What I've been telling people in sort of these closing days is, there are a lot of people who don't know who the judges are at the end because it's hard to get information out, and these are not the races people typically pay as close of attention to. But the people watching, and you all, I said this to Russ when we were in Cabot, they rely on folks like you to get the word out. So what I've basically said to people is if you can post on Facebook, text your friends, call your friends, maybe even people who don't typically vote in primaries, but vote in the general election. They vote for President Trump because that's a big driver in the general election, but maybe they don't typically vote in primaries. This is going to be a 20% turnout election. And like I said at the outset, conservatives have lost a lot of these elections. So if you can contact your friends, family, make sure they get out and vote, post on social media, that's really the best way to get the message out.
Because this primary
That's it.
is your general election.
Correct.
Your election is decided on March the 3rd. So there is no runoff. There is no general election. This is the real deal here. So people have to get out and get to the polls and make sure you pull that lever or punch that button for Nick Bronny for Arkansas Supreme Court Justice.
I'll go along with that. Well, Nick,
I appreciate it.
thanks for joining us, and we'll let you get on to your next event.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you
Sure
guys doing
thing.
this.
Glad to have you, and look forward to one of these days when you get up here. You can go fishing with us up here.
I, I'll take you up on
Okay.
that. So,
Okay. You
thank you.
take care and drive carefully.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So now, let me just say this.
There was something
Brian
going on.
Norris. Yeah.
Did you hear that sound like a bell?
Brian Norris, our other guest that we have scheduled. We're not sure that he's going to be able to make it tonight. He has been trying to get to Boone County for several months. He finally hooked up with them and was scheduled to address the Republican committee in Boone County in January when we got the big snow and they had to cancel because they canceled their committee meeting. But he finally was invited back to go over there and speak with them tonight. So I told him, we'll have you on if you can make it. If not, you need to get over there and speak with those people because he's not been able to address them. So it looks like he may still be speaking to the people over in Boone County.
Well, we'll have to ramble on about something for a few minutes.
Yeah, we can go. What'd you think about Justice Bronny?
It's the first I've heard of really any of them, and he sounds like he stands for the things I stand for.
Well, he impressed me when he said that he argued in front of the U.S. Supreme Court the case against the pharmacy benefit managers.
Yeah.
He was the one that argued the case in front of the Supreme Court and won it.
Yeah. Well,
And then also led the one against Joe Biden with the women and boys in little girls' locker rooms. He led that case and won both of them.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something else I like about a guy like him. I don't know the guy, but I liked what he said tonight. But he's not a lifetime politician. This is his first time around, so I would say that those type of people aren't as tainted as the other.
Well, judges should never become politicians.
That's right.
You know, I mean.
But they are.
But some of them do become that. But I'll tell you this: we were discussing some things along with Brian Norris on Saturday. Brian Norris has driven almost 39,000 miles just within the state of Arkansas in this campaign. The last I heard, he was getting close to like 60 out of the 75 counties, maybe even more, that he had been to. Justice Bronny said, I've put a lot of miles on my vehicle, but I'm not close to 39,000 miles. But then again,
well, Brian,
he's a
workhorse. He's a machine.
Well, but Justice Bronny's also still hearing cases.
Yeah.
So
right.
he's having to do this, in his off time and on weekends and stuff. So, but I'll tell you, he was in discussion, having a few discussions with him there on Saturday. He is as down to earth a person as I've ever met. His 9-year-old daughter was with him, and I'll tell you, she's a go-getter. He was talking about she was named after Margaret Thatcher. That little gal had his push cards, and she was handing out his push cards to everybody she could find. It was just such a beautiful thing. She was, it's like she was acting like his campaign manager. So.
I just noticed here he was endorsed by gun owners of Arkansas. He may have said that.
Who's that? Brian? That's Brian.
Yeah.
That's Brian Norris.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I don't know who all has endorsed him, but I'll tell you, the big thing is, when he says that his opponent believes in a living constitution, well, how long does it live? And how often do you update it if you're going to do that?
Yeah,
You know, that means every time somebody new comes around with a new term,
that's
you got to
legislating
update
from,
it.
that's legislating from the bench.
Yeah, exactly,
That's how you
exactly.
define
So,
that, I
you
think.
know, I'm firmly believe, you know, it's like standards, as a family or as a parent, you got children, you set the standards, you say, you know, Johnny or Jim or Jill or Betty, this is the standard. This is what I expect. And if you don't meet that standard, we're going to have trouble. It's just the same way with your employers or employees. You set a standard and you expect them to meet that standard. If the standards are always variable, you never know what's expected of you. When the law is constantly changing, you don't know what's expected of you. So
right.
you have to have the law, and it has to remain the law. Period. So that's why I'm firmly in his camp on I'm a textualist. It says it in the Constitution this way, and the Constitution was written in such a way, and the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers that discuss it. If you've never read those, it tells you, it gives you the communications between the founding fathers as they were discussing how to put together all the different articles of the Constitution.
Yeah, and it's important to know what the language was
Yes.
that was being used back then.
Yeah, they
was.
they would say, well, I believe it should be this, and no, it shouldn't be that, and they were back and forth. They argued pretty vehemently on some of it, but that's what the Federalist and Anti-Federalist
But what
Papers
the words
are.
actually meant.
Yeah,
then is
and the
what
words you have to look and say, okay, what did this
Yes.
word mean?
then.
In 1774 or 1775 when they were putting that together, because it certainly don't mean the same thing that we interpret it as now,
That's for sure.
Well, anyway, I guess we can go ahead and kind of, I don't think Brian's going to be able to make it tonight.
Not
And
looking like
I hope he's spending some good quality time with the good folks over in Boone County, because they need to hear his quality message. He is like you said, he is a go-getter. His message Saturday down there in Cabot was the most dynamic message I've heard him give yet.
Well, you want to report anything from that event, or?
Well, it was pretty, it was basically, we didn't really have a whole lot of new business. We did have, we've got, for people interested in the Turning Point USA up here in Baxter County in north central Arkansas, we had two speakers Saturday. One is in charge of Arkansas High School Turning Point USA chapters. They're called Club America. The other one is in charge of the college Turning Point USA chapters.
Now, is that a pretty hot topic still today?
Well, yes, they're still growing very quickly. You know, once the outrage over Charlie Kirk's assassination kind of, things fade into distance with time. But we do have the people, and I've got their contact information. Chris Chamberlain has their contact information, and we're going to be reaching out to them and really try to get the chapters up here in Mountain Home, Baxter County, north central Arkansas, get them cranked up. So many of our young people today they're searching for something to get involved in, and they haven't been able to find it. The old saying, the idle mind is the devil's workshop.
Yeah.
If we can give these young people something good, quality, wholesome to get involved in.
I hear rumblings that the youth is starting to
Yes.
take interest in
Yes.
the political climate.
The political
going on.
climate and religious climate.
Well, that
The young people in this country are turning to God a lot more so than the older people.
Well, I think some of the politics is driving them in that direction.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Possibly.
That's true. But that being said, I don't know, and certain all of us have our hot button issues. We have a certain amount of time we can devote to each and everything. For some of the people out there that would really like to sponsor a Turning Point USA chapter in either Mountain Home High School or somewhere around, or to get involved, certainly reach out to me or Joe or Jay. We'll put you in touch with the right people. We also have, we're still trying to get the young Republicans here in Baxter County up and running again. We've got the point of contact information and what we need to do for that. So, we just got to keep plugging away, because it's important, because the young people that's where it's at. Old folks like Joe and I are not going to be around for that many more years, and we want to have.
Don't say that too loud. Whew.
We're not the smartest folks around, but there's a lot of information we carry around in that old gray matter, and we'd like to pass some of that on to the younger people so that they don't have to relive the same lessons that we that we learned the hard way.
And if there's any of them out there watching this, I hope there is. It's kind of fun.
It is.
I think it is. Once you attend some of these events, it gets interesting when you start to understand what's going on, and you start to look forward to the next time you get
That's
to the
true.
next meeting. So
That's true.
at least that's what I find.
Me too.
I'm still a kid in that respect.
Yeah.
So
Well, Joe, I don't think Brian's going to be able to make it, so why don't we go ahead and start wrapping it up? Give the
we'll make a few announcements.
Yep.
Quorum Court is first Tuesday each month, 5:30 p.m. at the Baxter County Courthouse. Oh, and we might mention again that this is early voting still going on. Is that correct?
Yes, early voting is
So-
still going on
so-
at the Methodist Church down on 178, headed out of town on
Does
the
that go
west
on
side of
until
town.
Monday? And then
It goes on until the 2nd, I believe it is, 2nd of March, somewhere along in
I
there.
think that's a Monday, and then the next day
Yeah,
is
and then the next day is the
real
election. Yep.
Okay, well, Quorum Court again, that's the first Tuesday, 5:30 p.m., Baxter County Courthouse. City Council meets first and third Thursday, 5 p.m. at City Hall. City Planning Committee, second Monday each month, 1 p.m., City Hall. County Planning Committee, second Tuesday, 11 a.m. at the Baxter County Courthouse. A&P, which is Advertising and Promotion, that's third Thursday, 3 p.m. at City Hall. And the school board meets the third Thursday at 6 p.m. on Rodeo Drive at the Administration Building. And Baxter County Republican Committee, last Tuesday each month, 6 p.m. VFW. And that is tomorrow.
Tomorrow night, 6 p.m.
So come on out and
Come down and check us out and see what, kick the tires, if you will.
yeah, that's another thing to get involved in.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all this stuff is pretty important. You
We wonder,
find something that you're interested in. And
Arkansas traditionally is in the right toward the very bottom in voter turnout. Just barely over 50% of the people in this state registered or eligible voters vote. Just barely over 50%. And that's pathetic.
And it's way lower
you
than
wonder,
that in the primary.
Yes,
I
people wonder why in the world, they complain. Well, did you vote? No, my vote doesn't matter. Well, it doesn't matter if you don't vote.
And if you
And if
don't
you-
vote in the
primary-
primary, it matters. That's where you can make changes.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, I've heard people say, well, did you vote? Well, I went down there to vote, but I didn't see my candidate on the ballot. Well, did you vote in the primary? No, that don't make any difference. That's where your candidate lost. So it's really important in the primary because that's where your candidate needs your support the most.
If you want to see changes,
That's right.
That's the first place to go to.
That's
do
right. And talking about the Quorum Court, that's next week, and the thing about it is if you want to get on the mailing list, you just get a hold of Candace Reese, and she will email you the agenda at the same time that she mails out the agenda to the JPs. I just got mine yesterday. So get involved. Get involved in your community. Your community needs you, you know. And with that,
Well, I guess we'll
That's
call
all
it
I
a night.
got.
I want to extend an open invitation to any candidates that are running. Just reach out to us, me, Jay, or Russ. We'll try to make arrangements I don't know, we got one more Monday left before,
yeah, we got one more.
so
What?
if you want to be heard, get a hold of us and bring a sign.
Yep.
So other than that, I'm going to say we'll see you here next week, next Monday, same time, same place. And
Yep. And if you got any problems with your HVAC or you need anything, give Mountain Home Heat and Air a call.